It's the pre-market ritual you never knew you needed. Get ready to Gap and Go with the Calum Trading Institute.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Gap and Go. Surprisingly, what's the best way to describe it? It looks like many of the bad news that just continues to pour out over the last 2 weeks looks like it's priced in. We've seen a rally on the equity market across the board globally. In fact, we've seen certain countries rally all the way back into previous highs. So we'll cover all of that, and we'll talk about the overshoot in the dollar. We'll talk about the bond yields and basically the reaction that the market has been trying to price in and the new narrative about stagflation. Jason, maybe you can start first, and then we can go from there.
Well, I guess just short recap, diba? Like start of April, right? I guess parang kasi everybody thought that, once the tariffs were announced, like uncertainty would go down, right? But obviously what Trump announced was, a lot more severe than expected. Then markets had, mini, what do you call that? Mini explosion. I think that a lot of hedge funds were forced to unwind their positions, diba? And at one point, the US market was like down 20% from the peak. VIX spiked to like 60, right? And the bond market also had a small implosion, diba? From a lot of hedge funds actually have a lot of levered positions in basis trade yung tawag nila eh, where they buy the underlying and short the futures to capture a spread, diba? And of course, there were also a lot of money, I guess, got scared going back to their home country, diba? So that's why the dollar weekend, bonds weekend, bond yield spiked a bit, diba? But yeah, obviously that's all settling down now, right? So I guess obviously it's all priced in, and I guess the key question: what's going to happen going forward, diba? So I think that so there's still a lot of uncertainty. Just have to keep our eyes wide open as to what the impact of all the policy moves are, diba? And how the trade wars play out.
That's the biggest question mark. I mean, we get the question about how is GDP this quarter, how is first quarter earnings turning out, and my response is it looks like everything is irrelevant already today, because the market already had the correction of 20+%, and basically the market is telling you, hey, we're seeing downward revisions on EPS for the S&P. I think start of the year was close to 290. You've seen downgrades hit as low as 260 on average on consensus. And it looks like, how do we measure the size of the impact on the tariffs? There are some notes, some scares being happened. So for example, like Shane, Amazon was penalized last night because now they're indicating the tariff impact and the costs passing on to the consumer. I think the White House was pissed. So, all these things that are happening today, and then now you're hearing 40% decline last week in terms of shipments coming from China, concerns about empty shelves. I think Apollo Global Management made it clear, right? So essentially what you're going to see is front loading and then essentially empty shelves and then stagflation narrative. And I think that's what the market currently so far is pricing in today. Now that changed tone a bit, now from stagflation, it's more like recession. So I don't know. Brian, maybe you can share your thoughts also on what's happening right now.
Yeah, I guess all the negatives have been, as you said, priced in, and there was a signal that was made April 24. I think it was posted as sa X, yung super sway breath thrust. Are you familiar with that? So everyone's looking at it. April 24, relatives, the RS indicator thrusted above the 50 level after 2 months of being below 50. So if you're familiar with the relative strength indicator, if it's below 50, medyo oversold, diba? Tapos if it's above 50, If it's 50, neutral. If it's above, if it's near 70, mga overbought yun. So suddenly, after 2 months of being below 50, nag-thrust siya noong April 24 above 50, which coincides with Trump backtracking with his stance with China. I think the market has taken this as very bullish. Parang it's balancing the view of probably it's really not that bad. I mean, how the negotiations are going, and they feel that Trump will be backtracking with this stance with China. So this indicator kasi is very rare. That signal was very rare. Parang it happened only 7 times in history. Within 63 years, parang 7 times lang. And all of those instances, 12 months after, up lahat yung market. And then the median return was 26%. So putting it in, parang adding the context of Trump backtracking with China, probably eventually improving supply chains, diba? So, or all the negatives having been discounted already, you might see a surprise strong move by after 12 months. That's the bullish take on. But you'll see also indications of parang new leaders in the under the hood. You still have your cybersecurity, mga crowd leading the way. So what I'm saying is hindi lahat bearish. Merong mga certain piling sector, mga government efficiency software, Palantir, aerospace, yung Rocket Lab mo, di ba? Your utility, GEV, VST. Yan. Tapos yung sa retail, you'll see your Bros still there, Chewy, iba nasa taas, hindi naman nalaglag. And especially your hood, yung mga Bitcoin related. Still, all these are mga very speculative sectors, diba? And still, they're parang first to come out of after the 25% drop in the index. So medyo not so. I'm seeing it as not the market. You still can see bullish issues naman, but again, very cautious also kasi more than half of the issues in the universe in the US stocks, diba? Stock market parang pababa pa.
I guess we all talked about uncertainty, right? Seeing how big of an impact in terms of earnings, especially with all the tariffs and essentially everything, right? And that part looks like it's priced in. So far, maybe in the next 6 months, it looks like the initial scare was priced in, right? So everybody today is trying to look for some form of clarity or transparency on what's going to happen next. And there's just that and I still believe that there's still a wide spectrum. That spectrum maybe have made the window and quarter a little bit smaller, but I think the spectrum is still wide. What do I mean? Case in point is, the most important sector right now is the semicon, and obviously Nvidia is the poster child of AI, right? Today, 13% of sales of Nvidia come from China. And because of all the transfer pricing that is happening, so what do I mean is that instead of shipping directly to China, they course through Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc. And the estimate here is from direct and indirect total sales to China of Nvidia was as high as 40+%. So meaning Nvidia does $35 billion a quarter in revenue, 40% of that, close to 20 billion, 15, 16 billion, still a substantial amount. And I don't know going forward, should we expect like a 20-30% drop in revenue for like in the case of Nvidia? And if that's the case, has the market already discounted that impact? Right. I think
Mhm. Mhm.
that's the part where we're trying to find some footing. Because if you ask me today, I think majority of it is already priced in. So I'm not saying it won't go down. What I'm saying is that that impact, that initial impact, looks like it's already priced in and could
I
take a
think
while.
for me, of course, obviously there's been a tempering of expectations, diba? But
Mm.
yeah, I think still many things can still happen. Diba? Actually,
Yes.
what's happening with Nvidia to China is really for me, side effect na ng trade wars yan eh.
Mhm.
Diba? Kasi parang, okay, you don't want to sell to China. Okay. So now, China's forced to be parang self-sufficient. Diba? They're forced to develop their own semiconductors and stuff. Diba? So I think in general, that's what's going to happen to the world eh. Diba?
Yeah.
So,
That's why Huawei is also winning right now.
so actually, it's a negative for the US companies long term. Kasi if you think about it, US companies are actually the biggest beneficiaries of globalization eh. Actually, 50% of revenues come from abroad eh.
Well,
Diba?
to finish that part, they benefited from globalization because they were the technology leader.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
Oo, diba? So
so the
parang,
question
that's why
when
they're all preaching for the past 30 years, diba? Okay, let's globalization, blah, blah, blah. Okay, open up your markets, right? Then we'll attack you.
right, today.
Diba? Kasi sila yung leader, right? Okay, so,
A lot of negatives have been discounted, but parang it doesn't mean that this is going to go back new highs. I mean, probably for me, I doubt that it will, because I have parang from this point, is there anything to be excited about after? I mean, outside of the tariffs, it's if you look at the technology space, they're harping on AI, eventually doing more than 30% of the coding in Microsoft. No, those. But other than that, I don't see any news story that wasn't told last year. If you look at
Mhm.
diba yung mga satellite industries, the new ones.
Still AI.
So all those issues naman were also affected, especially mga quantum computing, diba? So the same informed specs that made us excited about trading last year.
But let's be clear, like one thing that's, I mean, we all agree upon right now is the market's in rally mode.
Yeah.
Nakabuka ka pang MACD. I mean, it's still wide open. Hopefully we'll start seeing something here, right? So it's just that the initial scare might be done. So this initial scare that happened here, tapos na eh, right? So you have the irrationality. Looks like when I see it, it looks like it's still rallying mode. But anything can happen thereafter.
Yeah.
I think the point being here is that this initial point here is that tapos na yung panic eh.
yeah. I think from my perspective, I think that we just have to assume that the trade wars will be there for the next few years, maybe even decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kasi parang, yes, we're de-escalating, but can you really go back to the before? Kasi parang, okay, if Trump, nag-180 si Trump sa tariffs, edi wala nang tax cut din, right? So parang might as well abandon your whole agenda, right? So parang tingin ko, it won't go away. The world is changing. And I'm just looking for places in the market where not affected actually by the trade wars, or maybe even benefit, diba? Kasi parang I think what Trump is doing really is like, okay, Asia, that's solid China's sphere of influence. Akan yung West and Latin America. That's what I'm seeing eh.
Mhm.
Like if you look at yung mga Brazil, Mexico, actually the tariffs are like low and a lot of the exports are like exempted, especially for like Brazil, diba?
Tama. I think the US, the Trump admin has essentially accepted that multipolar world.
Yeah.
Para sinasabi niya na, okay, Okay, agrees. Pero the way he says it, it's like they're the one leading it, but it's actually acknowledging China. But the tariffs that they're setting, like yung mga numbers that we've seen, 140%, ganyan. I think it's just part of the negotiation. Parang sinet niya yung spectrum, yung range of extremes. And then pag hindi niya nakuha yon, if he settles for anything above zero is a win for the US actually. If you look at it. Kasi parang lahat zero yan before this year. Tapos after the tariffs, if they can get a 10 or 20, panalo pa rin sila. And which, if that happens, it's better than a 145, diba? Or a 200.
Yeah, I mean, 100% parang embargo na yun eh. I don't want to trade with you.
So,
I think we all agree on this, right? The only reason why they take off tariffs is because they need something from it. So the ones that are being penalized, obviously, they're trying to dissuade them from, or not a threat, diba?
yeah, so what's exciting now is so in the part of the US, yung success nung Doge and yung treasury. That's why mas excited ako doon sa exciting din yung situation ng yields going down if they're going to be successful with that. Tapos yung second is the effect of these lower yields with other parts of the world, like the Philippines, like yung mga emerging markets. Kasi if you look at the Philippines, risk on dollar is weak. I mean, low inflation, 1.8%, and then yung yields na lang yung hinihintay eh. And I think if that really, really happens, probably may chance eh. May chance for the Philippines to really come out of this long accumulation multi-year.
We'll get to that in a bit. I think
So positive ba? So positive.
I'm not in that camp. I think we should just and the reason why I'll explain this really quick. But I'll throw one question out to Jason and maybe get his opinion on this. You know, everybody's worried about a bullwhip effect. So just to everybody remember is that when COVID pandemic hit, obviously inventory was all lacking because supply chains were all affected. And basically you saw inflation skyrocket. But also partly because ang laki ng ayuda eh. Is there a chance that might happen again this time? Because it's like all the supply chain again also disrupted today. Well, the ones coming from China are all disrupted today, and there's an adjustment period. You think you'll have a sizable impact versus before, or it's still very different from 2020?
Well, ako tingin ko for sure may sizable impact. So parang sudden stop, sudden disruption of flows, right? Diba? Like for example, US front loading everything, then after that, boom, no more, wala nang demand. Diba? I mean, hindi naman overnight ma-reroute lahat ng trade, diba? So parang, yeah, I think for me, talaga yung trade war is like yung biggest question mark. And could have a very significant impact. Diba? And actually, that's the thing about ASEAN. That's why it may concern.
Okay. Let's switch to emerging market really quick. I don't think there's much to talk about China. I think China is still under heavy uncertainty. Will it make it stronger over a long period of time? I think the answer we all agree is also yes. I think Jason talked about that really clear a while ago. It's going to need time because, again, filled with all the uncertainty coming from the size of the tariffs and whether Trump will backtrack, I think it's anyone's guess as to whatever is going to happen. So similarly, it's rallying because it's significantly oversold in the short term, but nonetheless, I think it's still range bound for quite some bit. Unless anybody needs to add something on China here.
Well, for me talaga, I think it's an ASEAN thing now. So China's our problem as well. Diba? Like, for example, yung Vietnam, diba? So Vietnam, after the first trade war 2018, they won a lot eh. Kasi parang naging China plus one strategy. So all the factories moved to Vietnam, right? So now Vietnam is like 85% exports to GDP. They have a giant trade surplus with the US, thanks to China. So ngayon, of course, they're affected by the trade wars, right? Okay, Malaysia naman, okay. A lot of excitement about data centers and stuff from Google, Amazon. Okay, what happens to that? Right? Okay, China exports are blocked, tariffed, or overcapacity, right? Where does China dump all those goods? Right. So parang if you're competing with China in manufacturing, parang you're dead, right? Yeah, parang for me, okay, parang it's so hard right now for our corner of the world, eh.
Not when you're an 80% consumption story like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Philippines. So everybody now, for the first time, like what Brian is saying, becoming overweight now in the Philippines. And I was just sharing to somebody like this morning, I was surprised because you're seeing more upgrades happen. And most likely it's because there's nowhere else to put the money, right? That's the reason why people are now looking at the Philippines. But in reality, nothing really changed with the Philippines. It's always been a consumption story. The only reason why people are overweight is because we're less affected versus everyone else. But I'm like, that doesn't change. I mean, it's still the same story, consumption driven story. But, good thing happened. We've seen substantial rally. Well, it doesn't look like it's everywhere yet, but you're seeing some good signs. And I think that's the part where Brian was talking about. Ito na ba yun? Diba? We've seen URC rally substantially over the last few weeks. SM, let me get all the big boys out. Ayala, trying to, but essentially you're starting to see more foreign inflows across the board happen. And what did you say, Brian? Ito na ba yun? Chance to get out of the neglect period?
Oh, it looks to me it's the parang later stage of your multi-year accumulation stage.
So I just drew it right now.
Yeah,
So-
because the panic that happened was during the pandemic, diba? Yung flush really happened during that time. And knowing the Philippines very illiquid kasi, so really the accumulation would really take long. And the exciting part right now is what's happening to the tariffs and reshoring, diba? Reshoring story in the US. And it seems like they are diversifying away from partly, but not fully, from China and to other countries, like for their industrial machineries and electric equipment. I think those are benefiting Japanese industrials. And I think that's the strategy. If you're diversifying away from China, you look into getting other parts from other countries. I'm not sure about the quality or how fast they do it, but if you're US, that's what you're gonna do. And hopefully hopefully it affects the Philippines also. Although sabi nga ni JP Morgan, we're the most domestic economy, di ba? In Southeast Asia. That's why they're bullish on us. But yeah, hopefully this round it's everyone else except China. So everyone else except those that are really yung US China tariff
Okay. So, to some extent, I agree. Maybe the downside is minimal. Like what we always talked about, I think, and even before this tariff thing, we were always saying that the downside is minimal, mainly because we're at valuations at 8-9 times PE, 2008 lows, right?
Yeah, it's hard to be bearish if the
Hard to be
numbers are like that.
just based on valuations alone. So if I look at, let's say, for example, from a PE standpoint, right? This part, sa totoo lang, hasn't changed too much. I think you're still looking at maybe mid-single digit across the board because of difficulty in the Philippines right now. It's really the re-rating that I guess the market is, the market is now trying to play on, right? And I'm not saying it can, meaning it can rally. I think it's just a matter of keep your expectations in check because this can take a while again, right? But don't get me wrong. I mean, that's the reason why you want to get in cash dividend stocks, right? I think that's the thing we always stressed ever since the month before. That's the reason why Meralco, Manila Water, despite all the things that have been happening, are actually sitting near the 52-week highs. And at the same time, you're seeing companies like Rally, URC, giving out what 5%, 2 pesos cash dividend at the bottom. And other consumption companies story like rallying as well. Mondenese 3.5, so on and so forth. So I guess that's really, I don't know, the play that's being played out right now. This can channel, but seeing like URC moves up, break out all the way to 100 pesos, kaya ba? Hindi ko alam eh.
Yeah,
If it happens,
I'm always thinking of the yung anecdote na sinasabi natin when we go to the malls, parang puno. So most of the time when anecdotes versus numbers, parang mauuna talaga yung yung
That's true also. And it could be because the market or regionally already priced in a Southeast Asian recession. That's the reason why URC was sitting at the low, what, 11, 12 times PE. I've never seen it at 11, 12 times PE. But it's not just us, like what we always talked about. We always say it's regional. Case in point, even Unilever rallied big in Indonesia, right? From the deletion and MSCI up until this one, that's a 90% rally. Okay, that's a 90% rally. So it could be that everything is just bottoming out across the board, which could be a good sign, right? It's gonna take a while, but at least the recession's kaya tapos na eh. So this will likely just channel parang ganyan na yun.
Siguro some of the signs that one of the signs that you can or signal that you can watch in the Philippines is the daily value traded. If I guess if it goes above 4, 5, say it's been while it's stuck there, the average value traded has been really low. So you see changes probably or surprises if that value trade average changes also.
I think you should also take a look at foreign buying. I think foreign buying will probably give you a better signal. Like last week, URC had 114 million in foreign buying. So I guess this week should be big, right? So even prior to this breakout that happened a few days ago, during this time, 140 million na yung net foreign buying, diba? So could be na.
Yeah, well, it's really a good sign, especially it happens after the April 2 Liberation Day. Really a good sign of strength.
Although overall Philippines for the month, ano pa rin, minus 72 M.
As
Yeah, year to date, 200 minus 280 million.
absence of seller.
So parang absence of seller. Wala pa
Parang
talaga.
naman yan. Alala ka ng buyback ng SM. SM Prime, URC, RHI, 8 billion buyback, malapit na matapos. I mean, can you imagine? Robinsons bought back 8 billion worth and the price didn't go up. But I guess these are for me good signs that are happening right now. Because the difference in valuation from emerging market versus the rest of the world is just so big. That's the reason why you're seeing big rallies happen across the board. So it's not just us that's in this, doldrums. What's Brazil today? 8%, 8% cash dividend, Jason?
Yeah. 14% bond yields.
Diba? So it's just normal that you start to see rotation. It's just, can you really see a rally big enough to justify it? Right now, we're just
Sa DNL mo drawing. Sa DNL. Sa DNL mo drawing. Sa DNL mo drawing yung line mo.
Sige. Diba?
Yun.
It's the same thing across the board. But it's good. I think that's the reason. I think the key here is that you're going to see all emerging markets. We've seen it start cut interest rates, and this is the time for them to do it. And just to give everybody an idea, like Philippines cut interest rates, and the peso still went down. Sorry, and the peso still strengthened, which is great, right? This is the only time for them to cut interest rates. I think BSP was also clear. We're going to cut interest rates by another 50 to 75 basis points this year. So that's additional 2 to 3 rate cuts. You're looking at it. Brazil, same thing, right? EU, already very weak. European cut interest rates. Singapore cut interest rates. And it looks like that's going to be actually a positive sign. And I think that's what Brian is talking about. This could be actually a better sign for equities because it's increasing liquidity in the system, right? So it's money out of...
Those are clear signs of capital inflow if you cut rates, diba? And
True. That part I agree on.
And the currency is
when valuations are sitting at 8-9 times PE, diba? Okay. Last things, first quarter earnings came out. I think SM Prime did 14% and 6% top line. Relatively strong earnings on SM Prime. The banks reporting, I think now they're at single digit. I think BDO went from 18 billion to 19.5 billion. So slower growth for 19.5 billion, but the banks will probably still do well. Maybe concerns of slower CASA because of lower interest rates on the second half of this year. But I think that's a 2026 issue more than 2025 issue. Earnings season the next 2 weeks. So hopefully we get to see more insight. But I think first quarter consumer earnings should still be okay. Concerns on URC, on the explosion of Malkan. I think it's a one-time event, but that one-time event, when it was talked about here, it tanked, right? So would that happen again? I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe it might see a drop, but I don't think it'll see similar to what happened before. So anything else we're missing? Wala. Okay. So I think this is where the accumulation breakout of Brian was talking about, in my opinion. I think this one is the accumulation or the breakdown. And I think this is what everybody should also be watching, because once this starts to break down, I think inflows and speculation in the PSE, you'll probably see volume traded also start to go up. And I think this is still the key globally. And it looks like some countries are the ones that are breaking down already.
Ako tingin ko bababa. This time.
I hope so. So cross our fingers. All right. Let's just wrap things up really quick. We talked about the US and the flip-flop that's been happening on tariffs, and what's been happening basically is markets have been pricing in more of a stagflation type of narrative, and that's the reason why there's just so much uncertainty that's been happening, especially on your bond market. That weakness has translated into weaker dollar, and that has been really movement outside of the US back into the rest of the world, right? And that's the reason why your European equities actually rallied all the way back into new high territory. Some speculation now happening in emerging market. And is it look like it's just beginning? Hopefully, seems so, but I guess there's still uncertainty on what earnings are going to look like. And yes, I think bond yields are still what we're all watching, because now emerging market is all cutting. Sorry, the rest of the world is already cutting because of the slowdown, and that might improve liquidity across the board. So with that being said, I think that's pretty much it for today's Gap and Go. Guys, Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.